shit. Here we go again.
Alright, round 2, Electric Boogaloo. Today we're looking at Grievous Wounds versus health regen effects early on, and whether it's really worth it or not, but this time more in depth than my last video. Before we start though, I released a video 3 weeks ago where I looked at some of the early Oblivion Orb purchases. I suggest you watch that, at least part of that, before watching this. There should be a pop-up on your screen up top somewhere. But yeah, in that video, I went over the fact that the tooltip currently doesn't track health regen reduction. I also tracked a portion of a game manually, going over the replay file in half-second intervals to get a better idea of the impact of Oblivion Orb in the early stages of the laning phase. I also went over Merlinomicon as a full buy and its advantages, so I won't be covering that in this video. I have also covered the argument about whether the purchase changes how the enemy laner is forced to change his playstyle. TLDR is that it really doesn't. Also, I want to ask that we avoid the player did it, so it must be good angle, which is just appeal to authority. Don't get me wrong, players like Faker, Zeka, Chovy are insanely talented players, but everyone is human. Pros and staff are extremely busy working on what is deemed more important than a single item purchase, such as working on champion pools, understanding the meta, drafting in the current patch, looking at decisions and how to approach fights, macro, etc. Numerical analysis of every single item choice is at the very bottom of this pyramid, so it's not a huge focus when compared to other aspects of the game, which I think is fair personally. Anyways, I know you all hate sticking around for the conclusion, so I'll just give a TLDR now. While I think there are some games where the purchase is okay and useful, my analysis after watching every single 1v1 in replays and collecting all the data is that it's a very marginal advantage most of the time, and the players aren't getting meaningful enough advantages off of small HP leads in lane to warrant troughing your build. Back to the video. So, what did I do this time around? I went over every single main stage match at Worlds that had an early Oblivion Orb buy. Initially, I loaded up the replay and manually tracked how much health regen reduction Oblivion Orb was doing during the laning phase from the moment of the purchase up to 14 minutes when turret plates fall. In some instances, I stopped tracking earlier as laning ends at like 10 minutes. If you watched Mark Z's video, you might have heard my name mentioned. I provided some of the data to help him out as mine was more accurate since I was going through the replay file.
From future Mark with concrete numbers that I just got from Shakarez and replay files.
At this point, a colleague of mine at Riot saw the thread on Reddit and reached out to me to help me out with seeing if we could make things easier via the API. The API doesn't track Grievous Wounds applications, so initially we started looking at health regen and health. Then I asked if we could cross-reference health regen with moments where the enemy champion did damage to another champion, and I used that to track the remaining matches, which was significantly faster than sitting in front of a replay going over it almost frame by frame. After tracking Grievous Wounds on all of these matches, I then grabbed the damage that the champion with Oblivion Orb did in the window I was tracking via the API, and then added the impact of Grievous Wounds because cutting health regen is essentially doing damage. As you can probably tell, this took a lot of time. Thank you to my hyperfixation and stubbornness for helping me pull through this, but I think I can safely say I've put in more hours into this than most. Anyways, I split these games into two categories, Azir or Ahri versus Akali or Sylas, and Akali versus Sylas. The first compromises of matchups where players are solely buying the item to cut health regen from Doran's shield and second wind, whereas the second one is a bit different as it's a matchup where Sylas maxes W, so Akali gets to cut that healing as well as cut into his health regen in duels. Sylas doesn't usually take both Doran's shield and second wind in this matchup though, it's usually one or the other. For the first category, healing reduction numbers landed anywhere between 100 to 200 health regen reduced, which was between 4 to 7% of a champion's damage. This is for all of the laning phase, up till plates fall. In most cases, the health regen reduction from Oblivion Orb was lower than the damage of Scorch. For the Akali vs Sylas matchups, Oblivion Orb was contributing more as it is cutting into healing as well, and it was doing around 7 to 10% of a champion's damage. I didn't include the Fnatic T1 game here as that was a bit of an outlier, with Humanoid being up 2 kills and up 1-2 levels before his purchase, which meant Faker was avoiding trading altogether. So, for 800 gold, this is the best buy for damage that you can get. That is absolutely correct, not questioning that. However, in most cases, the gains seem to be pretty marginal and don't make up for the impact that an earlier mythic item could have. The two matches where I think the players were sufficiently forced out of lane was Faker on Akali versus Scout's Azir in T1 versus EDG in group stage, and Chovy Sylas when going up against Zeka's Ahri in semifinals. What these two games have in common is that both players optimize fully for early game damage. So if you are going to do this, I like the idea of just maximizing everything via your runes. Scout ran Airy plus Scorch plus Cheap Shot on Azir, and Zeka had Airy plus Scorch plus an attack speed shard, which helped him get more autos in for poke. As I explained in the other video, the numbers are a bit inflated in the Faker case, as he played on the edge to make sure that he could get his ideal items on his recalls. So in the end, even with all the healing regen cut, he still got what he wanted out of his recall, and as a counter argument, Scout could have had Luden's Tempest for the key 10-minute dragon fight if he hadn't delayed his build with Oblivion Orb. As for the Zeka Ahri game, I never saw Chovy dip under 460 HP during the laning phase. I do want to highlight that I think Chovy played this lane pretty poorly for his standards. I don't want to take away praise from Zeka, he absolutely smashed this lane and grabbed 2 plates on his own and a significant CS lead. But I think he would have gotten most of these advantages even without the orb. Personally, I would still rather see double Amtome or Dark Seal plus Amtome instead. The upside of a Dark Seal getting stacks on an early Dragon or Herald fight can be huge. As for the argument about the fact that players are already delaying their mythic item, this is usually only for tier 2 boots, and if we're talking about Sorcerer's Shoes, they are a much bigger spike than Orb would ever be anyways with 18 Magic Pen. Now, this isn't exactly comparable as it's more gold, but instead of saving 800, try saving 1050 or less if you're running Futures Market, which is an OP rune, but that's a topic for another day, for a Hextech Alternator. 2 to 3 procs will outdamage all that you can do in a lane with Oblivion Orb, and it builds into one of the strongest bridge items in Shadow Flame. If you're playing Akali, this just builds into your Mythic anyways. So to give a practical example, in Fnatic vs T1 and with a 2-kill lead, Humanoid just opted into Orb anyways when he could have afforded an Alternator. Grievous Wounds has less value here because he's ahead, so Faker is discouraged from trading, and Alternator would snowball him further as it's better in all-ins. Anyways, that pretty much covers it. I think there are windows in which the item is fine, especially in the Akali Sylas matchup where you're cutting both healing and regen, so if you're backing with enough gold just for that, I think it's fine. I suspect that more aggressive scrim or solo queue games might be part of why it's such a popular early buy at Worlds currently. Overall though, I do think the item is overbought and should be more niche. If you are planning on buying it, I also like the idea of just doubling down for everything early game related in your rune setup. My sheets are linked to the description if you'd like to have a look at those. They are a bit of a mess, but I hope you can understand them. Feel free to ask me any questions. Peace.